how's it been going so far? What is your experience like teaching it out in the world?
Yeah, it's been really, really encouraging for me personally. And then, of course, in my own home, because it keeps me in this work. And that was why I dove into it of like, okay, I want to teach this so that I myself can stay accountable to this work and just really have this work ingrained in my bones to where it's like, it just flows out of me, I think is how I describe it, rather than it being so much work. And so I feel like I'm past the point of like, gosh, this just takes so much work and intention and effort. And yes, it's still a learned practice, but I feel like I'm on that other side. I'm over that hump to where there's a little bit of ease, having this be more of a lifestyle
Mm.
rather than something that I'm continuously learning and really having to practice with a lot of concentration. So it's been really encouraging in that way. And I'm currently in the middle of the third class. I have two sweet moms. So tomorrow night's our session 3. So it's just sweet. It's just a sweet time to get to know some of these other moms that I've had history with and share your baby with them. So and I do describe it as that way. I said, this is Hunter's baby, and like taking it out into the world so that we can help share it for her. So
So
I do
funny.
use those words with people. So
So what's you describe like this is some things are parts are challenging, for to kind of like make more natural and some. So I'm just wondering like what's easiest for what kind of skills are easiest for you and which ones are hardest for you?
I think for me personally, just like looking back at the hardships that I came into discovering this work initially was my reactivity. So the mindfulness practice is becoming easier. I wouldn't say it was in the beginning. I really struggled it felt like a forced, like I got to force myself to do this versus now it's, it's something I crave. It's like
Mm.
something I crave that quietness. I crave that time to just be alone and just to sit with the sound of the birds or to take a mindful walk with no little people or no dog or anything. Um, so I think that piece has shifted for sure of this is a practice that just I truly see how much it grounds me now. And so it's something I look forward and crave to having. Um, and then I think the piece that's probably still the most challenging for me is I think reflective listening. I think that still takes a lot of like concentration, thinking about it before I speak it back because it still feels uncomfortable. It still feels funny and weird. But I
Mm-hmm.
also appreciate when others reflective listen back to me. And so
Mm-hmm.
I see the power behind it and I know like I believe in it, but it's not just like flowing out of me with ease. And so that still takes a lot of just mental concentration to kind of formulate how I'm going to say that before I just spew it out. Cause I was one that would just react with my words. And so
Mm-hmm.
having to really think about that before, I think is still the practice.
And you're
Yeah.
describing like really what it takes to kind of go from like just reacting to choosing how you want to respond. I mean, that's really what it takes. And it's so interesting. And what you're also describing is this sort of like learning ladders sometimes is what it's called. And this idea that first we're unconsciously unskilled. We don't know what we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
This
Mm-hmm.
is kind of the blissful ignorance place. And then
Yes.
we move up a step to consciously unskilled. And that's when you know what you don't know. And that's a hard place to be because then you're like, oh, I I know what I want to be doing, but I
Mm-hmm.
am not able to do it yet. And then we move from there to consciously skilled, which is we know what we want to do and it takes some effort, right? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
conscious effort to use the skill. And then ultimately what you're describing is like kind of wanting to get to that place of consciously unskilled, which is where you have the or no unconsciously skilled,
Unconsciously
sorry, that's
skilled.
what I meant
Yeah.
to say.
Yes.
So
No, I.
you're you're just using, this is just part of you now and you don't have to be consciously sort of using the tool.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
and that just takes time and effort. to move
And I
up.
remember you sharing like those ladders and those steps when I was taking the 8-week course live from you, or maybe it was teaching it back to you. And for my personality too, I'm like one that wants to max out on whatever I can max out on. And so that was like a motivation for me of like, I want to get to that point. I want to get to that unconsciously skilled level. Like that's where I thought that I was going to be as a parent. So that was a big motivator for me, of those like steps of like, how can I get there? And then breaking that down into, okay, well, teaching this is one way, right? If I can teach this to others, it keeps me in the work selfishly, but it also helps me to practice what I'm preaching, right? Like,
Yeah.
so I do.
Know what you mean.
Yes. Not to say like, and to be humble, obviously, in it as well, but to be proud of the successes and to be proud of the wins, but in a humble manner too, of also meeting other moms in their struggling place, and to be like, I have been there and walked there, and I still have really rough days. And that non-striving 80-20% that you share about in your work too, like that 20% is always going to be there because we're human.
So now you're teaching your third session. So cool. What is sharing this with the people in your community like?
Yeah, there's been a learning curve for myself, obviously, to be on this end of it now. And to be under you, as far as like, this is her work. And yes, I like believe in this so much, but then, like you said, there's bits and pieces in that work to interject, right? Your own personal story, which is going to be different than yours, or, a different mindful parenting teacher. And so just kind of a learning curve of where to put that in, and kind of how that fits with what the mindful parenting teacher guidebook is. And so that's been an interesting, and I take away something different after each. I have, now that this is the third round, I've taken away something different each time. And so just being open, I think, to each group of mothers. This time I actually have a couple, a husband and a wife, that are sitting together, and then a mom. So there's the three of them. And that's just to bring in the husband, the spouse this time. And we're only 2 sessions in, coming up on our third, just brings a whole different dynamic. And I think just being open-minded about it, bringing in that curiosity piece as well, because it definitely is just bringing a different element to having the partnership there, that are learning from this and receiving this information, and then sharing individually their wins, even though they're in the same home raising the same child. So that's been really neat. I'm excited to continue with the 7 other sessions and hearing what that's like for them. So
That's cool.
Yeah, it's been good.
I taught it in person to a group of 8 couples one time, and it was cool. It was a community group wrote a grant, and they had me teach. I taught mindful parenting, and they, we were in a church. And the kids were like down in like the rec room with a childcare person. So it's really nice to have
that
parenting
setup.
Partners
yes.
together. Yeah, it was so nice because you got such huge diversity of views, and it's really, really interesting to see that.
Yeah. It's all been over Zoom. I tried to have an in-person session, and I just didn't have the interest here in our community. A goal of mine is to have, around my dining room table, have an in-person session. Like, that just makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside just thinking about it. So I hope that can happen at some point. But we're new to this area. We've been here for a year, and I'm still building that community. So it's just been through Zoom. But I have had a few opportunities I've realized that not everybody wants to say yes to the 8-week commitment. And so how can I still share this work with people, but in a much smaller sense? And so I asked our chiropractor's office if I could hold like a hour-long just evening session, because they do a lot of education in the evening, and they were open to it. And the chiropractor's wife came, and there was like 11 that had signed up. And so I just put together like a short PowerPoint presentation on breaking down mindful parenting. What is it? What are the two pillars to kind of your mindful parenting work, and just kind of like a snapshot as to what this work is. which was really neat and challenging for me to like, okay, how do I take this 8 weeks and put it into 1 hour? That if I was sitting receiving this information, what would be some nugget that I could take away from this? In hopes that, of course, by sharing this with them, that this is an 8-week course, that they would maybe then have the interest to like, oh yeah, I would like to learn more about it. So it's kind of like an introduction with a snapshot with a little mindfulness practice at the end. And that was challenging, but that was really exciting to be able to pull that together and put that forth and receive the feedback from people that attended to that. So I have had that opportunity as well. And sharing at my children's old co-op preschool at their parent meeting that they have every month. So I've had the opportunity to do that twice now, which was the same presentation, but so that's been neat. Yeah, that's been neat. Just a different style and something shorter. So
are you seeing what's happening for your students? What are you seeing happening for them?
So it's been interesting. Like once the 8-week course finishes, these are people that some of them are friends that are still in my life, on not a daily basis, but to where I think of them, a random day and check in with them and just see how's it going now that it's been a few months since being done with the course. And so that's been neat to just kind of continue those relationships in a different way now and with a little bit of accountability. But then I also realized I can't do that with every student, right? Like I can't do that with everybody, but just those every now and then someone will be put on my heart and to reach out to. So, but I think for some, it's been just the self-care, like how much they need to find time to truly give themselves care before they can pour into their children. Because they just keep pouring with an empty cup and it's not going well. So I think that's been some of the reaction that has been stirred up. The generational patterns has been really interesting for some students to be like, oh, I never thought about looking at my spouse and my partner's upbringing and mine and how we just put those together and just kind of roll with that. And so that's been another piece that has been talked about. And then the skillful communication, I think, has been the biggest challenge for the parents as to what that looks like. And so that's been the biggest piece of just encouraging them that this isn't like, you don't just use this iMessage once and it works. Like this is a practice, a learned practice, like learning a new language. That's going to take months and months and months, maybe even years until you really get it down. So that's been another piece that has been stirred up for people.
Catch new episodes of the Mindful Mama podcast and other free resources, including the Mindful Mom Guide at mindfulmamamentor.com. You can listen to every back catalog episode, including interviews with Dr. Dan Siegel, Iyanla Vanzant, Sharon Salzberg, and get meditations, join our private Facebook group, and more. Go to mindfulmamamentor.com now. I'll see you there.